Good morning, everyone. I caught some of the conversation at the fag end, and like every conversation on inclusive education, every bit is so precious. So let me start by welcoming everyone to this inclusive education conversation. And I thank eVidyaloka for giving me this opportunity to interact with India's leading minds in the space of children's education, development, growth, and of course, also a platform which does very important stories. So let me dive straight in and introduce you to the panelists. Ramji Raghavan, he's the founder and chairperson of Agastya International Foundation and a member of the Central Advisory Board of Education, Government of India. Now, Agastya Foundation does some path-breaking work in taking science learning to children in rural India, and they're present in 27 states. We also have with us, has Pooja joined us? Yes, Pooja Marwa. CEO of Child Rights in You, or CRY. No one better than Pooja to really give us a holistic understanding of how inclusive education cannot stand by itself. It's linked to so many other social parameters, health, education, nutrition. All of them are so interconnected. And we do know that CRY's work is motivated by a very simple philosophy that children should be at the heart of all human development work. We also have with us a man who inspires us journalists to look at the world as a glass half full rather than half empty. Dimant Parekh, founder of The Better India. His platform's positive stories of change have given voice to hundreds of grassroots level social entrepreneurs and individuals, creating a much needed ripple effect of change and truly the better India. Brinda Purna, she's the CEO of eVidyaloka. I'm sure all of you know her. She's a tireless warrior of inclusive education and at the helm of this non-profit organization. Now, eVidyaloka, we all know, spotted the shortage of quality teachers for rural India way back in 2010-11 and started delivering quality learning to these children via digital mediums. And this was before COVID changed the world and took education online by force and necessity. So thank you everyone for giving me the time. So I'll request that this be an interactive dialogue. So two things, don't wait for me to ask a question. Please feel free to add to what another speaker is saying if you've got a thought or a point to add. If you raise your hand, I will know that you want to jump in and I will make sure I make space for that. The other thing is that let's keep our answers concise so that we can cover everything that's important and have a lot of takeaways for all our audience, which I'm sure are involved in delivering quality education and making it more inclusive. So let me start with the gentleman who is right now at the helm of and working with the government to make education possible for all. Ramji, never in the history of the world have we had the challenge of educating 250 million. Look at that number. It is staggering. Educate 250 million children at the same time. And India has that challenge to do that. I think, can you just take us through your core philosophy with which you work at Agastya Foundation, when you look at that term inclusive and when you're sitting with everybody else on the panel of the National Education Policy, what is inclusive education? Let's set the foundation there.
Sure, thank you. I hope you can see this.
Yes, I can.
It's called a tippy top. Now it rests on its bottom when you keep it on a surface because that's where its weight is. But the funny thing is when you spin it, suddenly it tips over and begins to spin on its stem. Okay, it's very counterintuitive. And when you see something like that happen, you go, ah. In other words, your mind is stimulated, your curiosity is awakened. And then you wonder, why did that happen or how did that happen? And if you do find out, and it's by no means a simple thing, you experience the famous aha effect. And in the process of doing it, you play a lot with it. I carry it wherever I go. It's a lot of fun. You have a lot of fun, joy of learning, what we call the ha-ha effect. So what we have learned is that for true inclusive education to be of value and potentially transformative, you need three key elements. One is A, which is curiosity, sparking curiosity. The second is aha, which is creativity, the whole process of experimenting, discovering, controlled inquiry, making connections, and so on. And ha-ha, which is joyful learning. Now, if you ask yourself the question, how much of the education system actually has this, you will find very little. There's very little ah. If there is, it's often very negative. There's hardly any aha. It's always someone else's aha that you're memorizing and writing answers to questions and tests. And of course, there's very little ha-ha. So if you can inject this spirit into the education system, then I think it becomes very inclusive, because you're providing access. This costs all of 10 rupees. And I tell you, you can spend days and months and weeks, and the learning you'll get out of this will far exceed years of lectures in a classroom. In fact, there's a picture on the internet of Niels Bohr and Wolfgang Pauli, Nobel laureates, playing with the tippy top and trying to figure out its mathematics and physics. So very affordable. So like this, there are thousands of ways in which you can increase access to learning. But it's not just access. You must keep children engaged. For that, it has to be fun. It has to be reasonably challenging. You know, we're all born curious. That's the good news. The bad news is the education system suppresses curiosity. So that has to stop. I think if we did that, then we will be providing quality education to the masses. Then you're going to have a lot of takers, and then education becomes of value. You can do this physically, hands-on, and now with technology, you can do virtual labs and all the rest of it. That might take a little longer because not everyone has access, but there are ways, you know, of doing it. We created in COVID this book, which is, it tries to put in the form of a book called ActiLearn, what you can do with a tippy top using paper, sitting at home. So there are ways of skinning the cat that you might not have thought of, that COVID has forced us and many other people to explore. I hope I've partly answered your question.
Absolutely, but Mr. Raghavan, we are struggling with that aha moment, or the way of learning in India's best of schools, right? Even they've not transformed. So actually, perhaps the way Agastya Foundation is revolutionizing it from bottom up and ground up could be the way to go. I'll come back to that in just a little bit. Let me bring in Pooja Marwa now. Pooja, you've always maintained that, in fact, something that really stood out of the interviews that I've watched of yours during COVID, we are coming out of a life-altering pandemic, is that, you know, we talk about education, and all of us, you know, all that we thought was that during COVID, children from less privileged backgrounds missed out on 2 years of learning and they've been pushed behind. But your conversation is the only one which actually woke me up to the fact that, look, when they lost a safe space like school, it was life-altering for them in a very, very different way. They went back to child labor. Some of them got pushed back, or some of them got pushed to early marriage. I mean, something that hadn't even crossed my mind. So take us through how education, or inclusive education, cannot stand on its own. I mean, that's what I'm getting from what I've read about you.
Wonderful, Manisha. It's so heartening to know that the message is going through. I think the key learning that I've had and we've had at CRY from our work is that school, for the most marginalized children, the children that, if we talk about inclusive education, to me, it is the last child, right? It is the child who's handicapped, the child who is not in school because of gender, the child who doesn't have access to school because she lives in that last village in Manipur with just, you know, there may be just 4 or 5 kids in that village. So it's not practical to have a school, for example. But for them, school is so much more than just learning. It is a place of protection. It is a place of safety. It is a source of nutrition for so many of our children, thanks to the wonderful midday meal scheme. And also for many, many families, the fact that a child is happy and learning in school, and therefore that is where quality of learning becomes a factor, right? Keeps that child away from the family, either, using them as a resource for labor, or, getting worried and saying, oh, might as well, pull the child out of school and put her, get her married or whatever. Anyway, kuch nahi seekh rahi hai. So I think that key message, I think in COVID times has come through so starkly. Our data's just from our operational areas, we work in about 18 to 19 states, and we work with around, 3.5 lakh to 4 lakh children, is that just our own data, and we haven't had a chance, I mean, we're now beginning to study the impact really and what are the real numbers. But the data seems to suggest that more and more children have been pushed into marriage, labor, and a piece that I think, again, is escaping a lot of our attention is more violence, more home-based violence and abuse. And the good thing that's happened in the pandemic, I think, is that for most of us working with children and on education, we have realized we are going to have to find ways to reach their homes, to reach their parents. Most people I talk to have now started looking at, oh my God, we'll have to train parents. And for example, joyful learning for 0 to 6-year-olds. So I think it's a funny part of me that feels happy that child organizations are, or education-based organizations have to recognize and acknowledge the reality of communities and parents and the huge role that they play and should play, and that there is only so much that you can get to the children without them. So yeah, it's I think a good time for us to really understand and ensure that our schools become places of joyful learning and of safety, and a place where children find what all studies across the world tell us, right? An underprivileged child only needs one concerned, loving adult somewhere in their ecosystem, whether through the school, whether through in any other way. And yeah, that's a big thing. And you took me there, but I also, when you said inclusion, just yesterday I was looking at a cartoon somebody sent me, and I think it visualizes inclusion in the best possible way. You have a boy, you have a fence, right? Everybody's looking over the fence. You have a boy, you have a little girl, much shorter, and you have a child at almost knee level because he's in a wheelchair. And the only way to provide inclusion is that the little girl gets a stool, the boy gets taken off the stool, and the wheelchair child gets a ramp. And I think that, to me, is the heart of inclusion. We have to recognize inequities of access. We have to stop saying this is all part of history, it doesn't exist, inequity doesn't exist, it exists. And ensuring equitable access for all our children is what is so critical for us. I mean, some of the numbers on internet, and I'm sure Britta knows this way better than I do, the numbers on internet access for our children are scary. The phone access for young girls are scary numbers. We are seeing only 27% in rural access to a family device, where I've had young girls talk to me about how they get up at 4 in the morning because the only time they get the phone for their classes was 4 to 5. Yeah. So, I think there are a lot of issues around equity as well that have got really exacerbated during the pandemic.
Thank you, Pooja, for taking us through the experiences. I mean, like I rightly said, there's so many aspects which don't even make it into mainline media, and therefore we miss them completely. Brinda, I'll bring you in next. eVidyaloka, in fact, the pandemic, like she said, the access to digital, we feel there's a digital revolution going on, and therefore it should become so much easier to deliver education. But I remember I tried volunteering with eVidyaloka for 6 months, and of course couldn't continue with it because of my other commitments. But even at that point of time, this is 2015-16 we are talking about, the patchiness of the internet itself used to make it so difficult. What has changed since then? Because, eVidyaloka has been doing digital delivery of quality education. Like Pooja said, one person, one caring adult is all that a child needs. And you have been bringing that one caring adult to rural India and rural education, isn't it?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Manisha, for asking that. And it's heartening, right? What COVID has done really to us and to the whole world is to kind of push forward the digital acceptance. That has been the key, and what we were doing from 2011 somehow now seems a norm, with everybody kind of adopting it as a way of reaching out to the children, only because we couldn't kind of do that during the time when the children couldn't come to school, right? So that's really the highlight. But I agree with you that there have been times during our own classes, Manisha, that the internet has been patchy, but we've made sure that we equip the school with better infrastructure just to make sure that the experience is seamless, both for the volunteers and for the children, because that's how the learning would continue and the children would want to come back to school, especially. And since this is the best part of the school is what they say, most of them, the children who speak to us. But what has also been good during the pandemic is about us adopting the multi ways of reaching out to the children. Yes, if the children can't come to school, and if the children just have about one gadget at home, like the way Pooja mentioned, we said, hey, look, we'll kind of reach out through the television. We made sure that we worked with an aggregator organization. We gave them our videos. We made sure that they were broadcasted at a particular time on schedule. So the whole village would get to benefit from our intent of reaching out to the children and educating them. So why not, right? So this year, in fact, we've about educated about 50 lakh children during this whole different modes of us reaching out. Do we do television? Yes, we do. Do we have an app which itself has been quite interesting in the way we run facilitated classes by the community leaders engaging the children? Yes, we do that. Do we have workbooks and worksheets just so that the child understands that just not one, but there are multi modes of them accessing and continue to study? We do that as well, right? So are we happy for us to do all that we do? Yes. Is the child at the center of this whole thing? That is the way to go. And more strength, more effort from our end will only mean a more happy, educated child. That's the way I see this, Manisha.
Interesting. Okay, Dimant, bringing you in now to, so you heard everybody who's working on ground to make education inclusive and other social parameters and development. On the Better India, do you have stories to share? Again, I'm going to go back to the fact that curious learning, development growth, one individual can make is all that it takes to change a child's life. Share with us in terms of entrepreneurship, which is happening in the inclusive education space.
Yeah, thanks, Manisha. Of course, at the Better India, we kind of keep talking about a lot of individuals who've gone and made a difference in this space. But just before I kind of get into that, and these are truly inspiring stories, right? However, I'm still of a firm belief that education cannot be inclusive or truly transformational until we address the socioeconomic conditions of society. No matter what, it is not about lack of curiosity. It is not about lack of resources, of teaching aids. It's not about designing the best curriculum, which is front and center in the world. India as a country has a lot more to cover at the grassroots level of just pure cultural, social, economic challenges. Okay. I know you were kind of expecting more of the inspiring stories from me. But this is a topic which is very close to my heart. I've been working closely on the ground in different capacities, right from having taught in government schools for almost a couple of academic years to, we now run a scholarship where we kind of get children from the 7th to 10th grade back to school if they're not able to kind of afford it. And we really kind of, one of the things that we did in last year, we moved to a tier 2 town in India. And we were kind of really working, while working on the Better India, we actually started teaching some of the kids in the neighborhood, whose parents were basically domestic help, right? And here's a 9th grade student who really, really curious, right? I have a 7th grade student son. My son is 12 years old, and this girl is 14 years old. Very curious to learn. She actually just came up to me and said, "Could you teach me maths and physics and stuff?" And we started teaching her. And you realize that while the drive is there, the education is largely governed by the fact that she's the daughter of a single parent. The single parent is working from morning 7 till night 10 in a household, cleaning up their stuff. So there is absolutely no guidance, no mentorship. Sure, goes to a private affordable school, not a government school. So that part is checked. Has these ICSE textbooks and all of that stuff. But when we sat down and started teaching, the 9th subjects, I had to go rewind and go back to 8th. I had to teach those things. Then when I started doing that, I realized that I had to go all the way back to 4th grade and figure out how to do fractional additions before I came back all the way here to do quadratic equations. And this was not just her. So and then we had a larger session with a larger crowd of her peers and stuff like that. And you realize that it's not really a fault of theirs. That there is no guidance at home. The teacher can only be there for 40-50 kids. Let's say, right, 250 million kids in school, 130 plus million are in government schools, 120 million are in private schools, but 80% of that 120 million is in your private affordable schools, which, if you look at it, it's extremely diffused focus on a child. At home, there's absolutely no focus. You have to look at the demographic, which kind of goes to a private affordable school, right? It's, everyone here on the panel, of course, we've kind of had access to reasonably good education, largely due to an ovarian lottery, right? The point is, how do you eliminate the chances of an ovarian lottery affecting people's lives? And that, I think, is a very, very large problem which has to be solved at a state level. That the whole socio-economic condition cannot be addressed, by one or two initiatives. While of course that's needed, and like I said, for that one child, that one initiative is a life-changing thing. But if I have to step back and say what the largest scale of problems are, I really think there's a bigger challenge over here. I think the midday meal, for instance, is a great initiative to at least start addressing the problem of dropout rates, because you're able to provide nutrition and all of that. Having said that, coming back to a point where we've seen numerous stories of people kind of bringing in inclusive education, the one really, really kind of stood out for me was this group of folks in Mumbai, who picked up a discarded shipping container and put it under a traffic signal where the beggars kids were just hanging around, loitering around. They call it Signal Shala. You guys should look it up. And all the kids of the beggars there started just sitting there, right? And these guys started teaching. And now it transformed into 6 such branches, all run out of shipping containers, makeshift shipping containers under the flyovers, and are truly transforming the kids. You should see the aspirations of these kids. It's incredible. There's another very, very inspiring story for me personally. It's that of Uma Venkatachalam. She is in Tamil Nadu. She and her husband one day saw the sight of beggars in her town, and she said, "Why should this be the case, right?" And she's actually brought in all the orphans and beggars, and she's set up this massive academy. Today, students of that academy have made it to MIT, have made it to the IITs, are aerospace engineers. Truly transformational, done by just a couple, Uma Venkatachalam and her husband. You should totally look her up. So these are what really kind of gives me hope that we can get there. If 2 people can do it, imagine what the state can do, right? But I strongly believe that the state needs to kind of do this, and I think at a very, very core socioeconomic level.
Ramji, talking about the state, then we have to come to you. I mean, yes, the like I said, 250 million people, and perhaps more than 50% belonging to a socioeconomic background where the parent does not even have the basic education or the time to guide the child or support the child at home. Local dialect, I mean, that is something that we've faced continuously at a small school that we try and run in Bundelkhand for children in the age groups of 5 to 12 and 13, just basic education. We couldn't deliver simply because, even Hindi is difficult for them to understand. They like the Bundelkhandi language, and the teachers there, when we try to shoot videos with them, they just don't know how to deal with that medium. So many challenges, but that's not the point. The question that I would like you to probably address is, it is not a small problem. We are also many countries in India, many dialects in India. Socioeconomic variety is huge in terms of where people are on the economic ladder. What are the few things that the state can do to change this? I mean, even America it's such a developed country, and it's not being able to solve this problem. If you look at Bill and Melinda Gates' notes, the one area where they say that we have really not succeeded is education in the inner America, which is economically backward.
Look, development. I'm a student of development economics in one of my previous avatars. Development is a long-term process, and it's gradual. There may be some exceptions like China and Japan and some smaller countries. But by and large, it's taken a long time, and it's been gradual. And a number of things have to come together, right? It's not just one thing. Now, when we started Agastya, I did a lot of brainstorming with a gentleman who used to be the chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission. And the question was, and this is 23 years ago, why are we in the situation that we are in? Nehru talked about the importance of the scientific temper, scientific with a small s, which is really how to think, not what to think, how to learn, not what to learn, as being the most empowering skill that a human being can have. So what Dr. Iyengar said is, as a nation, this disseminating the scientific temper stayed with just very small groups, okay? We did not succeed in disseminating it to the masses of India. So, in other words, he said there's a complete absence of what he called cause-effect thinking. We don't understand how to figure out the cause of a problem, and therefore how to find a solution. So whether you hand it over to the state or anybody else, there are lots of people, even educated people, who are not able to understand how to find the cause of a problem and how to solve it, let alone act upon it. So cause-effect thinking is not something unlike curiosity that you're born with. It is something that needs to be nurtured. And a lot of the Western countries and Japan and so on, a century or more ago, understood the importance of infusing cause-effect thinking into education, okay? Which we didn't, although we talked about it. Now, unless that is done, you're going to find that the products that come out, whether they are farmers or whether they are healthcare people or whether they are policymakers, constantly make the same mistakes. Okay, so you never find solutions. Now you can say this is a state challenge. We've been saying this for decades. The government must do it. The government must act if you want to have something done at scale. That's true. That is true. And yet we are stuck in that because there are other factors that go into it. If you're somebody with a certain amount of power and ability to influence and do things, you know, there's a very good book called The Compass to Fulfillment, where the author, famous Japanese entrepreneur, says, success is a factor of three things: talent, skill, and attitude or character. And he was bemoaning the fact that in Japan, at the highest levels, you have talent and skill, but not character. Now, on talent and skill, you can be rated on a scale of 0 to 100. Okay? But on character, it goes from -100 to +100. So if you get -1 on character and you have 80 in skill and 80 in talent, you're still in -6,400 negative territory. So I don't want to get into a moralistic preaching kind of thing. In the old days, we would make fun of some ministers. Yeah, he can't speak English. He hasn't gone to a good university and so on. Today, in the last 20 years, you've had people in government who've been to all the Ivy League universities. The question is the third element. Because if you want to get something done, you have to have an objective view of things. You have to have some empathy. Then even if your solution isn't perfect, after all, there are hundreds of approaches to solving a problem, you will at least figure out and do something, and it will start to make some difference. And then you learn through that process. So I don't want to, you know, sound cynical, because I believe there are ways in which, despite this inertia in the system and vested interests and so on and so forth, which a lot of countries have. I'm not saying it's just India. It's not just India. There are solutions that can work if they are given a chance to work. I believe the new national education policy, you can say, why didn't this happen 30, 50 years ago? But forget that, it's happened. Marks a very big shift in thinking, at least, from what to learn to how to learn, what to think to how to think, and all the things that we've been talking about. Now, the acid test will be in implementation and commitment. And here, a lot of NGOs, I have been recommending to the government, look, if you want to solve a problem, seek a solution. In other words, find out if somebody has solved this problem, even if it's not at scale. And somebody might have solved that problem. And go and find out what is it, the secret sauce of that, and see if you can scale it. That's all we need to do. Many people have solved problems, not at scale, but they've solved them. Find the solution that they've got and just scale it with some tweaking and adjustments. You don't have to be a great, you know, an Einstein to figure out the solution to a lot of these problems. So there is a lot of hope, but it's not just hope. We have to have the will to act. This is what I told Sam Petroda in 2008, the National Knowledge Commission. He went around the table, is there any hope? A lot of people, educated people, put their hands up and said, I don't think there's hope. Why? Well, we've had so many commissions, so many recommendations. How come none of this has happened? So I put my hand up and said, look, hope is something we can all hope. Okay, it's cheap. The question is, do we have the will to act? That's it.
Well, let me bring in Brinda then. Brinda, eVidyaloka is delivering a part of what the National Education Policy actually has stated. I mean, very interestingly, you've tried to match volunteers in the language that they are comfortable with the village and the, you know, language, local dialects, right?
Yeah.
The local language. And I think that's one aspect which stood out for me in the National Education Policy, which is just the document which has just been released, that, you know, till grade 5th, we are going to have education in the mother tongue, right? So give us some examples, exactly what Ramji said, that, you know, maybe you've done it, but it can easily be scaled up.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for asking this question. The volunteers really have been assets as far as the eVidyaloka movement, as I call it, right? So we identify them where they have the passion and skills. Of course, we can onboard them on, we can train them on. So all these volunteers, we have about 6,000 volunteers, Manisha, as we speak, and each one of them teach children in the times which is convenient to the child. It can be an online mode, which we are teaching the way we are talking, or it can be offline sessions. The volunteers are also helping create content for the children. So are we engaging the child, teaching the child in the language that it is so familiar with? The answer is yes. By that, the child continues to stay invested in learning. It is not something which is alien to the child. So eVidyaloka, along with our model of delivering an online-based education and thereby reaching out to the children and through the help of volunteers in the regional local language, I think has been a great success. It's a nice concoction, which I'd be happy for smaller eVidyalokas really to come up, and we'll be happy to support and mentor them, all for the cause of an educated child.
Mhm. Pooja, what are your views in the follow-up to what Ranji has said, that look, it's really the will to act. And at the end of it, we can create a lot of skills, but there's so much to grapple with. And Himant raised the fact that you also grapple with, which is the social economic milieu of the families of children which are getting educated. But let's hope. I mean, where do you see the biggest hope when it comes to education, and how do you think we can go forward?
I think actually I'm going back to what Himant says, and Ranji was saying, yes, as organizations who are looking at not and should be looking at not the my 300,000 children, your 10,000 children, but actually looking at the population of the country, our country currently under 18 is 3.3 million, 333 million, right? So the solutions have to, obviously, to be inclusive, would have to be at scale, and the only way to provide scale equitably is through the state. And to me, for example, if I looked at the Right to Education Act, at one go, we were able to get at one go, we were able to, I look at the number of schools that opened at village level because of the simple, caveat that the school has to be within 1 to 3 kilometers. The access to education went up phenomenally, so as a country, and it doesn't take much, is my point, right? You need will and you need to put resources. Put money where your mouth is. You write an NEP, put down the implementation plan and where the budgetary resources are going to be allocated. Because one of the things that we've seen, for example, is you can pass a National Right to Education Act, but remember, education is a concurrent subject. The states have to come on board with their resources and their will as well. So what will really work is for both. We've seen it in Delhi. To me, the example of the government of Delhi and what they've done with education is the government schools is an example of, it's something that swims against this tide of hopelessness, that government schools are useless. Why should education be free? The fact is that of those 250,000 children we've been talking about, 50 to 60% need free education, because otherwise the minute a livelihood issue happens, livelihood is affected in some way of the family, whether it is a pandemic or it is a crop failure or it is a disaster. Private schools is not something anybody will be able to afford, right? Okay. So I think having the will and the only thing that can do this at scale is education. Within that, do we have a long way to go on the quality of education? Yes. My big worry is that, what I see is all of us went to privileged schools. No one taught me to question either. I was in fact one of the bad infant terribles of my class because I asked questions, right? And this, and I saw it happening to my own daughter so many years later. Oh, she asked too many questions. So as a society, we are ageist. We respect age, we disrespect young people. And that is a problem. Now, how are we going to sort that out at a fundamental level? I mean, I keep thinking for all of us, no, in the NGO sector, we say, look, what do we keep doing? We keep jumping into the river and saving people, but not questioning why is the bridge breaking in the first place? No? Why are so many people in the darn water? So I think some of the solutions, to me, I'm very clear that it has to be a state solution, because simply if you look at the alternatives could be civil society run organizations, it could be private organizations, right? Which private school is going to go to those last 4 kids in Bastar, where there are only 4 kids? There is no profit to be had. They're not going to go. The only way you can deliver it is through a right. And that is something that we've arrived at least through our work, where, you know, we spent years, as I said, putting band-aids and then realizing, oh my gosh, we're going to have to figure out how to build a stronger wall. The band-aids they'll just be more and more and more cracks.
No, I think you really raised a very important point. I mean, NGOs, yes, civil society, yes, but state does have to lead in education. And I mean, I am living in Delhi, so I can tell you that our cook actually had her elder two being educated in that cheap private school where she would struggle to meet their fees. And then for a third child, she moved her back to a government school, Delhi government schools. There's so much focus of the state here on just getting one thing right. And that's what I feel, that, you know, sometimes if you just take these 2 or 3, I know that health is huge by itself, education is huge by itself, but, you know, if you just, I think for the Delhi government, education has become so paramount. I think we're seeing on ground a big change on that front as well. Dhimant, final concluding words from you. I mean, you've already shared your thoughts, but you've heard all the other speakers. I'm sure you've looked at the new education policy. Anything else that you'd like to add which could help making education inclusive? Though I must say, like Mr. Raghavan said, I mean, I am surprised at the policy at least recognizing all the areas of deficit in our education system. This is the first time that I've seen it. In all the past education policies, I think this has been by far the one which recognizes the gaps the best.
So, absolutely. And I think what Mr. Ramji kind of mentioned, right? Those 3 things, luck, it was talent, skill, and the attitude, right? Or the character, right? And I think that's just so spot on. I just want to add one more layer to that, and that is access. I just think that access is so critical, because the access doesn't come in, even if you are the most curious child, you are the most kind of talented child, you don't get the opportunity, right? So I think the access part kind of becomes important. I just feel like, you know, the NEP is fantastic. I think I would have loved to be a part of that schooling system if I were to restart the whole thing all over again. I think it's just fantastic. I think the way they're kind of going about it. I just have this sort of a, you know, and I kind of derive this from economics, right? I mean, you have these 2 schools of thought. You have the Adam Smith school of thought that, you know, it takes time. Markets will eventually sort of optimize themselves, and there will be efficiency eventually. And then there's the Keynes model, right, where we just say that in the long run, we're all dead. So I think there has to be an undercurrent of building out the longer term policy, which is what the NEP is. And I think the implementation will take a while, and by nature of the beast, right, it is a large undertaking. But while that happens, while that thing kind of matures, we cannot have 8-10 generations just kind of, you know, wither away. So I also think that while that whole policy kind of gets implemented, I really think there's an urgent need for a sort of a more modular learning curriculum, which sets these kids up at least for the real world if not from an academic world, right? Because you look, I mean, today we personalize education based on people's learning abilities. That's become a big thing. And especially you go to private schools, you will see every child is kind of, has its own pace and all of that. The fact is that for the larger population, education has to be customized based on the economic conditions that they come from. And it's, because if you want to make sure that everyone kind of gets something out of the whole system, right? There should be modules like basic finance. How do you manage money? How do you manage health? How do you manage, basic math? And how do you set these people up for at least an ability to enter the economy, the job economy, and all of that? Those smaller interventions are also needed while we are building out the larger sort of thing, because the larger one will take time. And I think in the meanwhile, we can't afford to see these kids kind of just not be a part of that, big outcome that we want. So that's really this thing. I think we need to have a two-pronged approach to get things going.
Go ahead, Mr. Raghavan.
Yeah, so to Dhiman's point, I agree. It's like you're saying, I'm going to find a solution to children going hungry, and it takes years. And meanwhile, millions of children have gone hungry and their brains have been stunted and all that, right? So you can't have that. Now, Lenin, and I'm not a communist, although when I was young, I came close to becoming one. Lenin famously
Didn't
said,
we all?
Lenin famously said that greatness has to do with the ability to compress the column of history. Okay? And I've always thought that people who are in a position of perhaps attaining greatness at the highest levels need to ponder over this, compressing the column of history. Ataturk did it in Turkey. When he said that he wanted to change the script, his education minister said, that's a very ambitious goal, Mr. Ataturk. Give me 5 years and I'll work on it to de-Arabize the script. And Ataturk said, I don't think you're hearing me. I want it done in 3 weeks. Okay. Now it was done because he took a hands-on role and because people trusted him and had a lot of faith in him. So all those are preconditions. But our capacity as a society to either led by somebody at the top or together, if we can find ways of compressing the column of history, as opposed to sometimes deliberately widening the column of history, then I think we will see some change. And even each of us in our own small way, if we can compress the column of history in what we're doing without creating problems, I think that will make a huge impact.
I couldn't have done a better wrap out of this discussion. I think that's a fantastic wrap out, that whether you're an individual or the state, I mean, let's all work towards compressing the column of history when it comes to inclusive education. And I think the pandemic has given us or forced us into so many different ways. Many people have thought out of the box. Many NGOs have thought out of the box on how to deliver education. Digital has made a lot of it possible to deliver in a different way. And I just, let's live in hope with each one trying to do our bit. And all the very best to every one of you who is really working on ground to deliver some level of quality education. Dhimant, please keep bringing us really inspiring stories. I just love the Better India. I cannot tell you how much I enjoy reading it. And like I said at the opening, that it really has taught me as a journalist to look at life as half full always. So thank you very much, Brinda and the eVidyaloka team, Akshay, for giving me this opportunity. Unless somebody else has anything else to add, can we conclude here?
Can I just conclude?
Yes,
just in line with what we're talking about today, is that, every last child is really what we should be focused on. Because, the child is today. If we don't solve for her tomorrow, she's gone. So I think just if as a society, that's what we believe, then that's what will take us through.
Wonderful thought. I mean, we know it. It's just that we don't action it enough.